Imagine being shot 9 times by a firing squad and walking away, or falling 33,000 feet from an exploding plane without a parachute and surviving, or being the target of over 600 assassination attempts and dying of old age. These aren't movie scripts. These are the documented, bafflingly true stories of history's most ridiculously lucky individuals. This isn't about skill or courage. It's about the people who became living, breathing statistical errors. 1. Peter Freuchen wasn't just a Danish explorer. He was a 6'7" giant of a man who treated the Arctic like his personal backyard. But one day, the backyard tried to bury him. Caught in a blizzard, he dug a hole for shelter, only to be trapped under a sudden avalanche of snow and ice that froze as solid as concrete. With his tools out of reach, Peter was facing a frozen tomb. So he did what any resourceful, desperate man would do. He defecated, shaped it into a long, sharp chisel, and waited for it to freeze solid in the Arctic temperatures. Armed with his newly forged poop dagger, he chiseled his way out. As a bonus, he later had to amputate his own gangrenous toes with a pair of pliers and no anesthetic. Seriously, this guy's life was a survival movie on hard mode. 2. In 1945, a B-25 bomber lost in thick fog crashed directly into the 78th and 79th floors of the Empire State Building. Elevator operator Betty Lou Oliver was on the 80th floor and was thrown from her car by the explosion, suffering severe burns. Rescue workers placed her in a nearby elevator to get her to safety. That's when her luck went from terrible to catastrophic, and then looped all the way back to miraculous. The elevator cables damaged in the crash snapped. Betty Lou Oliver plunged 75 stories straight down. But here's the kicker. The 1,000 feet of severed cable had fallen to the bottom of the shaft first, coiling into a dense, springy cushion. The falling car landed on this makeshift metal trampoline, and she survived. She holds the Guinness World Record for the longest survived elevator fall. Talk about a soft landing. 3. If you ever meet someone like Frane Selak, the Croatian music teacher, maybe keep a safe distance. This man was a walking, talking Final Destination movie. In 1962, his train plunged into an icy river, and he survived. A year later, he was sucked out of a malfunctioning airplane door and landed in a haystack while 19 others perished. Then his bus skidded into a river. His car caught fire twice. He was hit by a bus. Finally, his car went off a cliff, he was ejected, and managed to cling to a tree while his car exploded 300 feet below. After flirting with death 7 times, the universe apparently decided to apologize. At 73, he bought a lottery ticket for the first time in 40 years and won nearly $1 million. I guess he used up all his bad luck. 4. Timothy Dexter was a fantastically unintelligent American businessman from the 18th century who, by all accounts, should have died penniless. His wealthy, educated rivals constantly gave him terrible investment advice, hoping to ruin him. They told him to sell warming pans, used to heat beds in cold New England, to the tropical West Indies. A dumb idea, right? He did it anyway. The locals found they were perfect for ladling molasses, and he made a massive profit. Then, they sarcastically told him to ship coal to Newcastle, the English town that was the world's leading coal producer. It was the definition of a pointless venture. Dexter did it, and his ship arrived right in the middle of a massive miners' strike, allowing him to sell his coal at an astronomical price. He failed upwards so hard he broke the system. 5. Maggie Dixon's story is proof that sometimes a job poorly done can save a life. In 1724 Edinburgh, Maggie was convicted of a crime and sentenced to be hanged. The execution went ahead as planned. She was strung up, dangled for the required time, and was declared dead. Her body was placed in a wooden coffin and loaded onto a cart for burial. On the way to the graveyard, however, the people transporting her heard a terrifying banging sound coming from inside the coffin. They opened it to find Maggie, very much alive and probably very confused. Under Scottish law at the time, her sentence was to be hanged until dead. Since the sentence had technically been carried out, she couldn't be executed a second time for the same crime. She was legally free to go and lived for another 40 years, forever known as Half-Hanged Maggie. 6. Violet Jessup might be the most unlucky or lucky woman to ever work at sea. She was an ocean liner stewardess who had a bizarre habit of being on board ships during their worst moments. First, she was working on the RMS Olympic when it collided with a British warship in 1911. The ship was heavily damaged but limped back to port. A year later, she took a job on its brand-new sister ship, the supposedly unsinkable RMS Titanic. We all know how that voyage ended. Violet was loaded into a lifeboat and survived the historic disaster. You'd think she'd find a new career, but no. During World War I, she served as a nurse on the third sister ship, the HMHS Britannic. In 1916, it struck a German mine and sank in under an hour. And yes, Violet survived that too. If you ever invent a time machine and see her booking a cruise, take the train. 7. The odds of being struck by lightning in your lifetime are about 1 in 15,300. So, please meet Roy Sullivan, a U.S. park ranger who apparently made a personal enemy of the god of thunder. Roy was struck by lightning not once, not twice, but an officially recorded 7 different times between 1942 and 1977. He was hit while in a lookout tower, while driving his truck, while standing in his own front yard, and even while fishing. The strikes set his hair on fire, blew the shoe off his foot, and left him with numerous burns. He eventually started to believe some supernatural force was actively trying to destroy him. And who could blame him? For a while, he even carried a can of water with him everywhere he went, just in case. They didn't call him the human lightning rod for nothing. 8. Of all the billions of people who have ever lived, only one person is officially confirmed to have been directly struck by a meteorite. Her name was Ann Hodges. In November 1954, she was taking a nap on her couch in Sylacauga, Alabama, when an 8.5-pound chunk of rock from outer space crashed through her roof. It smashed into her large console radio, ricocheted off it, and slammed into her hip. The impact left her with a massive pineapple-shaped bruise, but she was otherwise unharmed. Think about the cosmic odds. A fragment of an asteroid, traveling for millions of years through the void of space, ended its journey by giving a woman a nasty bruise while she slept. It's arguably the most targeted yet ultimately harmless celestial event in human history. 9. Imagine falling from a plane at 33,000 feet. Now imagine doing it without a parachute. That was the reality for Vesna Vulovic, a 22-year-old Serbian flight attendant in 1972. A suspected briefcase bomb tore her plane apart mid-air, and she plummeted towards the earth, trapped in a section of the fuselage. Miraculously, this metal coffin landed at the perfect angle on a heavily snow-covered wooded mountainside in Czechoslovakia, cushioning the impact just enough. She was found by a villager who had been a medic in World War II and knew how to keep her alive until help arrived. She woke up from a coma with no memory of the fall, and her first words were reportedly asking for a cigarette. She survived the highest fall without a parachute ever recorded, proving that sometimes the universe has a very strange and violent way of making you famous. 10. Surviving one atomic bomb is a statistical miracle. Surviving 2 is a cosmic joke with a terrible punchline, and Tsutomu Yamaguchi was the one who heard it. In August 1945, this 29-year-old engineer was in Hiroshima on a business trip when the Little Boy bomb detonated less than 2 miles away. The blast ruptured his eardrums and left him with serious burns, but he was alive. So, what do you do after living through a nuclear apocalypse? You go home. The next day, badly injured, he took a train back to his hometown of Nagasaki. The day after that, while describing the mushroom cloud to his disbelieving boss, the second atomic bomb, Fat Man, exploded. Once again, he was within the blast radius, and once again he survived. He lived to be 93, a living testament to both humanity's destructive power and one man's absurd refusal to die. 11. Some people collect stamps. Dutch professional cyclist Martin de Jonge seems to collect near-death experiences with Malaysia Airlines. In March 2014, he was scheduled to fly on flight MH370, the one that famously vanished without a trace. At the last minute, he found a cheaper flight that didn't have a long layover and switched. A few months later, in July, he was booked to fly on flight MH17, Just before leaving for the airport, he decided to save a few €100 and swapped his ticket for a different flight that left a few days later. MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, killing everyone on board. Twice in 5 months, this man's thriftiness saved his life. He literally dodged 2 of the most infamous air disasters of the 21st century because he was a savvy shopper. I bet he never flies on any other airline again. 12. For 3 days, Harrison Okene was trapped in a nightmare. He was the cook on a Nigerian tugboat when it capsized and sank 100 feet to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. While his 11 crewmates drowned, Okene was washed into an office bathroom that had miraculously formed a 4-foot air pocket. In total darkness, freezing cold, and with only a can of Coke, he sat on an overturned box and listened to the sounds of unknown sea creatures eating the bodies of his friends. When a rescue diver team arrived, they were on a grim body recovery mission. Imagine their absolute shock when they were inspecting the wreck and a hand suddenly reached out from the darkness and grabbed them. Okene had survived for nearly 72 hours in an underwater tomb. His rescue was a 1 in a million miracle. 13. In May 1902, being arrested was the best thing that could have happened to Ludger Silberus. He was thrown into a solitary confinement cell in the town of Saint-Pierre, on the island of Martinique, for getting into a drunken brawl. A few days later, the nearby volcano, Mount Pelée, erupted in one of the most violent explosions of the 20th century. A superheated pyroclastic flow moving at hundreds of miles per hour instantly incinerated the city, killing all 30,000 inhabitants. All except one. Ludger's cell was a poorly ventilated bomb-proof stone box, partially underground, which shielded him from the deadly heat and gas. He was discovered 4 days later, horribly burned but alive. He was pardoned for his crimes, and later toured with Barnum and Bailey's circus as the man who lived through doomsday. 14. The Halifax explosion of 1917 was the biggest man-made blast in the pre-atomic era, a catastrophic event that flattened a huge part of the Canadian city. In the middle of this chaos was a British sailor named Charles Mayhew, who was standing on the waterfront when the world exploded. The blast wave launched him like a human cannonball, sending him flying an estimated 2 kilometers, that's over a mile, through the air. The sheer force of the shock wave ripped every shred of clothing from his body. He eventually landed, completely naked and dazed, but very much alive, in a field on the far side of the harbor with only minor injuries. Imagine trying to explain that sequence of events. You didn't just survive the apocalypse. You took a brief, terrifying, and involuntary flight to get away from it. 15. World War I pilot E.S. Lawrence earned his nickname Lucky in the most spectacular way possible. During a dogfight, his plane collided with a German aircraft, a situation that typically ends in a fiery death. Lawrence was violently thrown from his cockpit and began plummeting to the earth. But this is where reality took a sharp turn into cartoon physics. Instead of falling to his death, he landed squarely on the tail wing of the very same German plane he had just collided with. The German pilot, equally shocked but still fighting for control of his spiraling aircraft, managed to make a crash landing. Both men survived, and Lawrence was promptly taken as a prisoner of war. This wasn't just surviving. It was surviving with an impossible level of acrobatic flair. 16. While soldiers in World War II were armed with machine guns, grenades, and tanks, British officer John Churchill, better known as Mad Jack, thought that was all a bit boring. His weapons of choice were a Scottish broadsword, a longbow, and bagpipes. This wasn't a joke. He's credited with the last recorded longbow kill in wartime, taking out a German NCO in 1940. He once captured 42 German soldiers and a mortar crew armed with only his sword. He would signal a charge by playing his bagpipes, a terrifying and confusing sound on a modern battlefield. His personal motto was, "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." How this man survived the entire war is a testament to the idea that sometimes being unpredictably and utterly insane is the best defense of all. 17. When you jump out of a plane, you worry about your parachute not opening or a bad landing. you don't worry about being taken out by a cosmic sniper. But for Norwegian parachutist Anders Helstrup, that almost became a reality. During a jump, something dark and rocky zipped past his head at incredible speed. He felt nothing, but his helmet cameras caught everything. It was a meteorite, specifically in its dark flight phase after it had stopped burning. He had captured the first ever footage of a meteorite falling through the sky from the skydiver's perspective. The odds of this happening are so astronomically small that it's practically impossible to calculate. It's one thing to be lucky, it's another thing to narrowly dodge a bullet fired from the asteroid belt millions of years ago. The universe tried to smite him and missed by inches. 18. Andrew Jackson, the 7th U.S. president, was a man so famously tough he was nicknamed Old Hickory. In 1835, that reputation was put to the ultimate test during the first ever presidential assassination attempt. A disgruntled house painter named Richard Lawrence approached Jackson and fired a pistol at him from point-blank range. Click. Misfire. As Lawrence pulled out a second pistol, Jackson, being the absolute madman he was at 67 years old, didn't run or hide. He charged, raising his cane to beat the assassin down. Lawrence fired the second pistol. Click. Another misfire. The odds of two separate properly loaded pistols misfiring in the humid weather of that day were later calculated to be 1 in 125,000. It seems even gunpowder was too intimidated to work properly in the presence of Andrew Jackson. 19. If survival were a competitive sport, King Zog, the first of Albania, would be the undisputed world champion. This man wasn't just lucky, he made a career out of dodging death. During his reign, he reportedly survived over 55 assassination attempts. That's not a typo, 55. These weren't distant plots either. In 1931, while leaving the Vienna State Opera, assassins ambushed his car. Zog didn't just duck and cover. He pulled out his own pistol and returned fire, helping his bodyguards fight off the attackers. He was a notorious chain smoker, reportedly puffing through 200 cigarettes a day, yet it was other people trying to kill him that was his biggest health risk. For King Zog, assassination attempts were less a threat and more a recurring annoyance on his daily schedule. 20. Surviving over 55 assassination attempts is impressive, but Fidel Castro looked at that number and said, "Hold my rum." According to his head of security, the Cuban leader survived over 600 plots and conspiracies to kill him, mostly orchestrated by the CIA. And these weren't simple attacks. They were a cartoonish catalog of failure. They tried everything: an exploding cigar, a fountain pen with a hidden hypodermic needle, a wetsuit dusted with a flesh-eating fungus, and even an exploding conch shell to be planted at his favorite diving spot. They even sent a former lover to poison him, but she supposedly hid the poison pills in her cold cream jar, where they dissolved. It seems Castro's greatest defense wasn't his bodyguards, but the sheer, almost comical incompetence of his enemies. 21. Jean Bedel Bokassa was the self-proclaimed emperor of the Central African Republic, a notoriously brutal and eccentric dictator. But even tyrants need a bit of luck. During a public appearance, an assassin managed to get close enough to throw a grenade directly at him. The deadly projectile was sailing through the air, about to turn the emperor into a red mist, when fate intervened in the most mundane way imaginable. A waiter, who was walking nearby, instinctively raised the metal serving tray he was carrying to shield himself. The grenade bounced off the tray, flew in a completely different direction, and detonated away from its intended target, saving Bokassa's life. His continued rule was secured not by an elite bodyguard, but by a piece of dinnerware. That waiter definitely deserved a raise. 22. In 1972, King Hassan II of Morocco was flying home on his personal Boeing 727 when his own Air Force tried to shoot him out of the sky in a military coup. Rebel fighter jets riddled the plane with bullets, disabling one engine and threatening to tear the aircraft apart. As the royal plane began to fall, the king realized that brute force wouldn't save him, but a massive bluff might. He grabbed the radio and, with astonishing coolness, shouted in the voice of a crew member, "The tyrant is dead! The tyrant is dead! Long live the homeland!" Believing their mission was a success, The rebel pilots stopped firing. They even saluted the dead king's plane by dipping their wings and escorted the crippled aircraft to a safe landing. He didn't just survive, he tricked his own assassins into being his honor guard. 23. Being a politician can be dangerous, but for Spanish Prime Minister Adolfo Suarez, the biggest threat came from a hunting trip with a friend. During the hunt, his companion swung his shotgun around to track a bird, accidentally pointing it directly at Suarez's head. The man fired. At that exact split second, a single, unlucky pigeon flew directly between the two men. The bird took the full force of the shotgun blast, instantly exploding in a puff of feathers and saving the Prime Minister's life. It was the ultimate case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time for the pigeon, and the absolute luckiest moment for Suarez. He was saved by a feathered bodyguard he never knew he had, a true Secret Service agent who made the ultimate sacrifice completely by accident. 24. Wenceslaus I, the Duke of Bohemia in the 10th century, was known as a pious and good-natured ruler. So good, in fact, that his power-hungry younger brother, Boleslav the Cruel, decided to have him killed. A group of assassins lay in wait for Wenceslaus outside a church, ready to ambush him on his way to morning service. It was a perfect plan. But on that particular morning, the Duke, a man of routine and prayer, did something completely out of character. He overslept. After waiting for a while and seeing no sign of their target, the assassins got bored, figured he wasn't coming, and simply went home. Wenceslaus's life was saved not by guards or a premonition, but by a simple, lazy snooze. Sometimes the snooze button is the most powerful defense system in the world. 25. Imagine standing before a firing squad. Your sentence has been read, your fate is sealed. This was the reality for British soldier John Starks, condemned to death for desertion during the Napoleonic Wars. As the soldiers of the firing squad raised their rifles and took aim, a friend who had come to witness the execution stepped forward for a final handshake. Starks, with moments to live, clasped his friend's hand. It was a prolonged, somber farewell. As they held their handshake, a rider was spotted galloping towards them in the distance, waving a piece of paper. It was a last-minute pardon from the Duke of York. Had the handshake been even a few seconds shorter, the order to fire would have been given. Starks was saved from a volley of bullets by the simple, lingering act of saying a proper goodbye. 26. The story of Walter Summerford is so bizarre it sounds like a tall tale, but it's a chilling reminder that lightning apparently can hold a grudge. In 1918, while serving as a British officer in World War I, Major Summerford was struck by lightning while on horseback, paralyzing him from the waist down. He recovered, only to be struck again in 1924 while fishing under a tree in Canada, which paralyzed the right side of his body. He recovered again. In 1930, he was hit a third time while walking through a park, which left him permanently paralyzed. He died 2 years later. But the lightning wasn't finished. 4 years after his death in 1936, a lightning bolt struck the cemetery and destroyed his tombstone. The universe didn't just want him gone. It wanted to erase the very memory of him from the face of the earth. 27. The story of James Bartley is one of the most famous and debated tales of the sea. In 1891, while on a whaling expedition near the Falkland Islands, Bartley's boat was smashed by a massive sperm whale. He was thrown into the sea and vanished, presumed drowned. The next day, the same whale was caught and killed. As the crew began butchering it on the deck, they noticed movement inside the whale's stomach. They cut it open and, to their utter astonishment, found James Bartley, unconscious but alive. He had spent over 15 hours in the belly of the beast. His skin was bleached white by the gastric juices, and he was blind for a time, but he survived. While some historians question the story's authenticity, for decades it stood as the ultimate sailor's yarn, a tale of being swallowed by a monster and living to tell the tale. 28. J.P. Morgan was not just a titan of industry. He was the man who owned the White Star Line, the company that built the Titanic. As its owner, he was naturally scheduled to be on the ship's glittering maiden voyage, occupying one of the most lavish suites. He had his bags packed and was ready to go. However, just before the ship was set to sail from Southampton, he abruptly canceled his trip at the last minute. The official reason given was a sudden illness, though some rumors suggest he was simply preoccupied with business or a mistress. Whatever the reason, his last-minute decision saved him from going down with his own unsinkable masterpiece. It's the ultimate example of a boss wisely choosing to skip the first day at a new and very flawed workplace. 29. The strange case of Hugh Williams is less about one lucky person and more about a name that seems to be a cosmic life preserver. In 1664, a ship sank in the Menai Strait off the coast of Wales. The only survivor was a man named Hugh Williams. In 1785, another ship sank in the exact same spot. Again, there was only one survivor, and his name was Hugh Williams. Then, in 1820, a third vessel capsized in the same treacherous waters. Once again, everyone perished except for a single man named Hugh Williams. The odds of this triple coincidence are so mind-bogglingly small that it defies rational explanation. It's as if the sea gods of that particular strait had a strict policy. We will take the ship, but we're leaving Hugh Williams behind. 30. In the deadly backstabbing world of Roman imperial politics, being perceived as a fool was a death sentence. Unless you were Claudius. Plagued by a limp, a stammer, and various nervous tics, he was seen by his family, including the psychopathic Emperor Caligula, as a harmless, embarrassing idiot. While other members of the imperial family were being systematically poisoned, exiled, or executed during power struggles, Claudius was completely ignored. He was the family joke, not a threat. Then, in 41 AD, Caligula was assassinated. The Praetorian Guard, in a panic to find a new emperor, stormed the palace and found Claudius hiding behind a curtain, trembling with fear. They didn't kill him. They proclaimed him emperor on the spot. His entire life of being underestimated became his greatest asset, allowing him to fail upwards into the most powerful position in the world. 31. Getting shot once and surviving is lucky. But Wenceslao Moguel's story is in a league of its own. During the Mexican Revolution in 1915, he was captured and sentenced to death by firing squad without a trial. He was lined up against a wall, and a squad of riflemen fired at him 9 times, riddling his body with bullets. To ensure the job was done, an officer then walked up and delivered the coup de grace, a final shot to the head at close range. Miraculously, none of the bullets destroyed his vital organs, and the headshot passed through his cheek and out the other side without hitting his brain. He pretended to be dead until his executioners left, then crawled away to safety. He lived a long life, even appearing on Ripley's Believe It or Not, forever known as El Fusilado, the executed one. 32. In the 11th century, long before the Wright brothers, an English monk named Aylmer of Malmesbury decided he had figured out the secret to flight. He constructed a set of crude wings, climbed to the top of Malmesbury Abbey, and, with more faith than aerodynamic knowledge, leaped into the air. Shockingly, it kind of worked. He glided for over 200 meters, a distance longer than 2 football fields, before a gust of wind caused him to lose control and crash. He survived the landing, but broke both of his legs and was left with a permanent limp. He later lamented that his only mistake was forgetting to add a tail. This man didn't just survive a reckless experiment, he became one of history's earliest and most successful pioneers of aviation, all while wearing a monk's robes. 33. Anders Helstrup, the Norwegian skydiver, nearly got hit by a meteorite in its dark flight phase. But what if one of those cosmic rocks actually connects? In the 11th century, long before modern aviation, an English monk named Aylmer of Malmesbury decided he had cracked the code to human flight. He strapped a pair of homemade wings to his arms and body, climbed to the top of Malmesbury Abbey, and launched himself into the void. Amazingly, his contraption worked for a moment. He glided for a remarkable distance of over 200 meters, that's more than 2 football fields, before he lost control and plummeted to the ground. He survived the crash but broke both of his legs, leaving him with a limp for the rest of his life. He later reportedly claimed his only mistake was not building a tail for stability. This man wasn't just lucky to survive. He was an accidental aviation pioneer, hundreds of years ahead of his time. We've laid out 33 stories of luck so absurd they feel like a glitch in reality. But history is a bottomless well of insanity, and we know we've only scratched the surface. So here's the challenge. What is the one story of unbelievable luck we were absolute fools to overlook? Don't just tell us a name. We want the story that makes our list look tame. Unleash it in the comments. And if you want to see which of your suggestions make a future video, demolish that like button and subscribe.